You've been watching people your entire life, haven't you? Studying their faces in quiet moments, searching for something real beneath the surface. There's something in you that sees through the performance, that feels the weight of all the unspoken truths hanging in the air between what people say and what they actually mean. You know that feeling, don't you? When someone speaks to you, but their words feel hollow, like echoes in an empty room. When their smile doesn't reach their eyes. When their laughter sounds forced, mechanical, almost desperate. You've learned to recognize the theater of human interaction, and sometimes, especially in those quiet moments alone at night, it leaves you feeling profoundly isolated. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this burden. He saw through the masks that people wear, and it made him both powerful and deeply lonely. He knew that most human interactions are performances, elaborate dances of deception, where people show you who they think you want them to be, not who they actually are. Tonight, we're going to explore the psychological truths that Nietzsche discovered about human nature. Not the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about authenticity and connection, but the raw, uncomfortable realities about how people actually function, how they reveal themselves in their smallest gestures, how their deepest fears and desires leak through the cracks in their carefully constructed personas. You're here because you've sensed these truths already. You've felt the disconnect between what people say and what they do. You've noticed the patterns, the repetitions, the ways people unconsciously reveal exactly who they are when they think no one is paying attention. And perhaps, most importantly, you've begun to question whether you truly know yourself beneath all the roles you play for others. The ability to read people isn't just about understanding them. It's about understanding the parts of yourself that you've hidden away, the aspects of your own nature that you've denied or suppressed in order to be acceptable, lovable, safe. Every person you meet is performing a role, but they're not performing for you. They're performing for the version of themselves they wish they could be. And in that performance, they reveal everything. Nietzsche observed that humans are driven by what he called the will to power, not necessarily power over others, but power over their own circumstances, their own sense of worth, their own narrative about who they are. Watch someone long enough, and you'll see how desperately they're trying to convince themselves of their own story. A person who constantly talks about their achievements is trying to convince themselves they matter. The one who always plays the victim is trying to maintain a sense of moral superiority while avoiding responsibility. The person who never shows vulnerability is terrified of being seen as weak. The one who always needs to be needed is running from the fear of being forgotten. Man is something that shall be overcome, Nietzsche wrote. But most people aren't trying to overcome themselves. They're trying to overcome their fear of being truly seen. You can read anyone instantly once you understand this. Everyone is either moving towards something they desperately want or running from something they desperately fear. Usually both. And they'll reveal which is which in their body language, their word choices, their silences, their obsessions. Watch how someone responds to silence. Those who rush to fill it are uncomfortable with what might emerge in the quiet. Watch how they speak about others when they think it's safe. This reveals how they speak about themselves in their own mind. Notice what makes them defensive, because that's where their deepest insecurities live. The person who can't stop giving advice has never learned to sit with their own problems. The one who always has to be right is trying to construct a reality where they're safe from judgment. The person who withdraws when things get difficult hasn't learned to trust that they'll be accepted even when they're struggling. But here's what Nietzsche understood that most people miss. Recognizing these patterns in others is only the beginning. The real work begins when you start recognizing them in yourself. There's a secret language that everyone speaks without knowing it. It's written in the pauses between their words, in the things they choose not to say, in the way their body shifts when certain topics arise. Nietzsche called this the language of the unconscious, the way our deepest truths reveal themselves despite our best efforts to hide them. You've probably noticed this already. The way someone's voice changes when they're talking about something that really matters to them. How their posture shifts when they feel threatened or insecure. The specific words they choose when they're trying to manipulate a situation versus when they're being genuinely vulnerable. We are unknown to ourselves. We men of knowledge, Nietzsche wrote. Most people are sleepwalking through their own lives, driven by impulses and fears they've never examined. But those unconscious drives leak out in everything they do. Listen to how someone talks about their past. Those who constantly reference old wounds are still bleeding from them. Those who claim to have moved on from painful experiences but bring them up frequently haven't actually processed them. The person who says they don't care about something they keep mentioning clearly cares deeply. Watch their eyes when they're thinking. The direction they look, how long they hold eye contact when they look away. These aren't conscious choices. They're windows into their internal processing. Someone who looks down when speaking about relationships is often feeling shame or sadness. Someone who looks up is often accessing memories or constructing stories. Notice what questions make them uncomfortable, the topics they deflect from, the subjects they return to obsessively. These are the areas where their unconscious is trying to work something out, to heal something, to understand something they haven't been able to face directly. But perhaps most importantly, notice your own reactions to different types of people. The ones who irritate you are often reflecting something you don't want to acknowledge about yourself. The ones you're drawn to are usually embodying something you wish you could express. The ones who make you feel uncomfortable are often showing you parts of human nature you've tried to deny exist. Nietzsche understood that we can't truly see others clearly until we're willing to see ourselves clearly. The ability to read people is inseparable from the willingness to be read. The most profound thing Nietzsche realized about human nature is that we don't just lie to others, we lie to ourselves. And those self-deceptions create patterns of behavior that are absolutely predictable once you know what to look for. Every person has developed elaborate strategies to avoid facing the parts of themselves they find unacceptable. They've constructed entire personalities around these avoidance patterns. And once you understand someone's primary self-deception, you can predict how they'll respond to almost any situation. The person who always needs to be seen as good will betray their own values rather than risk disapproval. The one who prides themselves on being logical will ignore obvious emotional realities that contradict their self-image. The person who believes they're independent will sabotage relationships rather than admit they need others. The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe, Nietzsche observed. But most people don't struggle against the tribe. They struggle against themselves. They've internalized the tribe's voice so completely that they can't hear their own anymore. Watch how someone responds when their self-image is challenged. Do they get angry? Do they withdraw? Do they double down on their position? Do they immediately start explaining or justifying? These responses reveal their core wounds, the places where they're most afraid of being seen clearly. The person who gets defensive when you question their motives is usually questioning them themselves. The one who immediately explains their behavior is often ashamed of it. The person who gets angry when you point out a pattern is usually aware of that pattern and frustrated by their inability to change it. But here's the key insight. People can only be as honest with you as they are with themselves. If someone is running from their own truth, they'll be unable to see yours clearly either. They'll project their own fears, desires, and judgments onto you. They'll interpret your actions through the lens of their own self-deception. This is why Nietzsche emphasized the importance of self-knowledge. Become who you are, he wrote. Not who you think you should be, not who others want you to be, but who you actually are beneath all the masks and stories and self-deceptions. Every human interaction is a dance between power and vulnerability. People are constantly navigating between their need to feel safe and their need to feel significant. And in that navigation, they reveal everything about their inner landscape. Nietzsche understood that the will to power isn't about dominating others. It's about overcoming the powerlessness we feel in the face of existence itself. Watch how someone handles moments when they feel powerless, and you'll understand the core of who they are. Some people collapse into themselves, becoming small and invisible. Others lash out, trying to regain control through aggression or manipulation. Some people become pleasers, attempting to earn safety through usefulness. Others become rebels, defining themselves in opposition to whatever they perceive as trying to control them. But underneath all these strategies is the same fundamental fear. The fear of being truly seen and found lacking. The fear of rejection. The fear of abandonment. The fear of not mattering. Man is the only animal that blushes or needs to, Nietzsche noted. We're the only creatures capable of shame, and that shame drives most of human behavior. People will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid situations that might expose them to shame. Watch how someone treats people who have less power than they do. This reveals their true character, far more than how they treat equals or superiors. The person who is kind to servers but dismissive to family members is performing kindness, not living it. The one who's generous with strangers but cruel to those closest to them is using generosity as a social mask. Notice how they talk about their failures and mistakes. Those who can acknowledge their shortcomings without elaborate explanations or deflections have usually done the inner work of accepting their humanity. Those who always have a story about why their failures weren't really their fault are still running from themselves. Pay attention to what they do when no one is watching, when there's nothing to be gained. These moments reveal their authentic values, the things they care about when there's no external validation or reward involved. Most importantly, observe how they handle your vulnerability when you share it. Do they meet it with their own openness? Do they try to fix it or solve it? Do they minimize it or change the subject? Do they use it against you later? This tells you everything about their capacity for genuine intimacy and their relationship with their own tender places. There's a quality of presence that can't be faked, a depth of emotion that can't be performed. Once you've learned to recognize the difference between genuine feeling and manufactured response, you'll never be fooled by emotional manipulation again. Nietzsche wrote about the difference between those who live from their authentic nature and those who live from their social persona. The authentic person's emotions arise naturally from their actual experience. The persona-driven person's emotions are calculated responses designed to produce specific outcomes. Real emotion has a quality of spontaneity, even when it's painful. It emerges from the person's core and flows outward. Performed emotion feels hollow, rehearsed, strategic. It's designed to manipulate your response rather than express their truth. Watch their micro-expressions, the fleeting moments before they compose their face into the appropriate response. These glimpses reveal their authentic reaction before their social conditioning takes over. The flash of irritation before the polite smile. The moment of fear before the confident assertion. The brief sadness before the cheerful deflection. Listen to the rhythm of their speech when they're talking about different topics. When someone is speaking from genuine experience, their words flow naturally. When they're constructing a story or trying to convince you of something they don't really believe, their speech becomes more mechanical, more careful, more rehearsed. Notice what happens to their energy when they're talking about things they truly care about versus things they think they should care about. Authentic passion has a quality of aliveness to it. Performed passion feels forced, exhausting to maintain. The person who is always fine, when you ask how they're doing, is often protecting themselves from being truly seen. The one who immediately launches into dramatic stories about their problems might be using their pain as a way to control your attention and response. But here's what Nietzsche understood that most people miss. Recognizing pretense in others is only valuable if it helps you recognize pretense in yourself. We all perform sometimes. We all have moments when we're not being entirely authentic. The question is, are we conscious of when we're doing it And are we doing it by choice? Or are we so identified with our personas that we've forgotten who we really are underneath? The goal isn't to become someone who never performs. It's to become someone who chooses consciously when to reveal yourself and when to protect yourself, rather than living from unconscious reactivity and fear. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, wrote Carl Jung. But Nietzsche understood this principle long before Jung articulated it. People don't see the world as it is, they see the world as they are. And in their judgments and reactions to others, they reveal everything about their own inner landscape. Listen to how someone talks about people who aren't present, the qualities they notice, the things that bother them, the characteristics they admire or despise. They're painting you a perfect portrait of their own psyche. The person who constantly notices when others are being fake is usually struggling with their own authenticity. The one who's always pointing out other people's selfishness is often uncomfortable with their own needs and desires. Those who get most upset about others being attention-seeking are usually starved for attention themselves, but have judged that need as unacceptable. Watch what triggers their strongest emotional reactions. These triggers are rarely about what's happening in the present moment. They're about old wounds, unhealed traumas, and aspects of themselves they haven't integrated. The person who flies into rage over small slights is usually carrying a mountain of unexpressed anger from their past. The one who becomes devastated by minor criticism is still dealing with childhood messages about their worth. Notice what they assume about your motivations. When someone assumes you're being manipulative, it's often because manipulation is familiar to them. Either they do it themselves, or they've been on the receiving end of it so often that they expect it everywhere. When someone assumes you're judging them, it's usually because they're judging themselves harshly. Pay attention to their stories about relationships, both current and past. The patterns they describe, the problems that keep recurring, the types of conflicts they find themselves in repeatedly. These patterns reveal their unconscious beliefs about themselves and others, their deepest fears, and their unhealed wounds. But perhaps most revealing of all is what they don't see or acknowledge in themselves. The blind spots, the qualities they possess but don't recognize, the impact they have on others that they're unaware of. These shadow aspects often get projected onto others with particular intensity. Nietzsche called this process psychological projection, and he understood that it's one of the primary ways humans avoid taking responsibility for their own inner work. It's easier to see the speck in someone else's eye than the log in your own. The person who can own their projections, who can catch themselves in the act and use it as information about their own psyche, has developed a level of self-awareness that's rare and powerful. They've learned to use their judgments as a mirror rather than a weapon. And so we arrive at the deepest truth Nietzsche discovered about human nature. Most people spend their entire lives running from themselves. They construct elaborate personalities, develop complex strategies for managing other people's perceptions, and exhaust themselves trying to be acceptable, lovable, safe. But beneath all of that performance lies their authentic self, the person they were before the world told them who they should be. The ability to read others clearly isn't ultimately about gaining power over them or protecting yourself from their manipulations. It's about learning to see through the masks we all wear so that you can finally remove your own. Become who you are, Nietzsche wrote, not who you think you should be, not who would make others comfortable, not who would be safe or popular or admired, who you actually are in the deepest, truest sense. This process begins in solitude, in the quiet moments when you're not performing for anyone, not managing anyone's emotions, not trying to be anything other than what you are. In these moments, you begin to hear the voice that's been buried under years of conditioning and fear and people-pleasing. You start to notice your own patterns, your own projections, your own unconscious behaviors. You begin to see how you've been reading others through the lens of your own wounds and desires. You recognize the ways you've been performing your own version of acceptability. And slowly, carefully, you begin to make different choices. Not dramatic, revolutionary changes, those rarely last, but small, quiet shifts toward authenticity. Moments when you choose truth over safety. Instances when you express what you actually feel instead of what you think you should feel. Times when you honor your own needs instead of automatically prioritizing everyone else's. The world responds differently to authentic presence. People can sense when someone is no longer performing, no longer desperately seeking approval or trying to control outcomes. There's a quality of groundedness, of inner authority, that emerges from someone who has stopped running from themselves. This doesn't mean you become someone who shares everything with everyone or lives without any social awareness. It means you become someone who chooses consciously when to reveal yourself and when to protect yourself, rather than living from unconscious reactivity. You begin to attract different people, those who are also doing their inner work, who can meet your authenticity with their own. You begin to repel those who are only comfortable with your performance, who needed you to stay small and manageable and predictable. Who are you when no one is watching? What part of you is waiting to be heard beneath all the noise of other people's expectations? What would happen if you finally chose yourself fully, completely, without apology or explanation? These aren't questions to answer quickly or lightly. They're invitations to a lifelong journey of becoming, of peeling away the layers of conditioning and fear until you reach the irreducible core of who you actually are. Nietzsche understood that this journey is both the most difficult and the most essential work of human existence. It requires tremendous courage to face yourself honestly, to see your own patterns and projections and self-deceptions. But it's also the only path to genuine freedom, to authentic relationships, to a life lived from the inside out rather than from the outside in. The ability to read others clearly is ultimately a byproduct of learning to read yourself clearly. And both abilities are invitations to the same profound transformation. The movement from performance to presence, from reaction to conscious choice, from the desperate attempt to be acceptable to the quiet confidence of being authentically yourself. In the end, that's what Nietzsche was pointing toward in all his psychological insights. Not the power to manipulate or control others, but the power to finally, completely, courageously be yourself.